Hey, quick heads up. This is part 2 of my Final Fantasy X-2 review. In part 1, I discussed the game's development history and reputation among fans. If you're interested in hearing about my thoughts regarding that, check out part 1 first. But if you just want to see the review, keep watching this part. Upon booting up the game, we're greeted with this opening sequence featuring this extremely somber piano piece, to the point that it doesn't seem to fit the game's tone. Although, the original menu theme was also unfitting to that game's tone, being a fairly uplifting track. And for that reason, I kinda like it. Both games' main menu themes call back to each other, or rather, they complement each other. Plus, X-2's menu theme is really good. Once you actually start playing the game, we find ourselves in Lucas Blitzball Stadium. Except, as expected, there's no Blitzball game taking place inside. Instead, we have a protagonist, Yuna, performing the game's opening vocal theme, Real Emotion. But she's not the only important person present. As the track plays out, we get introduced to our main trio. Yuna and Riku return from 10, but we're also introduced to a newcomer to the Final Fantasy X world, Pain. And although I threw this opening out of the bus in the last part, I can't lie, this is a strong opening. It's got it all. A perfect introduction to the game's style, some great visual flair, Real Emotion is a banger song, and there's a cool blink and you'll miss it hint that this isn't actually Yuna playing the song. Yep, we got ourselves a case of identity theft right off the bat. This person is, in actuality, another new character, LeBlanc, using Yuna's garment grid to take on her identity. She's not so much the main antagonist, but rather a rival to our main trio. Throughout the story, they will butt heads with her and her army of goons. Hey, don't look at me like that. That's what the game calls them. After dealing with LeBlanc, we enter this game's version of the airship and get introduced to the main supporting cast. Brother returns from the original, acting as the group's leader. At least that's what he tells himself. Buddy is a newcomer, being the airship's navigator, and the final member is this extremely smart kid and the inventor of the garment grid, called Sinno. Oh, that's an extremely unfortunate name to have in this franchise. Together, alongside our main trio, these characters make up the sphere hunting group known as the Gullwings. Oh, right, there's also this blue guy who manages the bar, but he's not really that important. With all the Gullwings introduced, the main gameplay loop gets introduced alongside it. Interacting with Buddy will bring up the world map, and certain areas will be labeled hotspots. Once you arrive at a hotspot, you'll start a mission, hopefully finding more spheres containing this mysterious Titus lookalike. By the way, much like the original, Titus is never referred to by name, so for all intents and purposes, I could call him Yoshi throughout the whole review, like how I did with my 10 review. But I won't. Also, one quick thing. Given that the main cast features 2 of the 3 female playable characters from the previous game, you may be wondering why Lulu isn't the third-party member. Well, there's a perfectly understandable in-universe explanation. Wakka got her pregnant. You hear that? You hear that? If you're not racist, you'll bag the hot goth chick and have a loving family! Who would have thought about that? While going through the missions, you'll start getting familiar with this new version of Spira, and the dynamic between the Gullwings, which is pretty entertaining. Riku's whimsical personality gets a chance to really shine since she's no longer preoccupied with a certain someone walking up to death's door. Speaking of that certain someone, Yuna constantly sounds like she's actually enjoying her new lifestyle. And Pain is pretty much the straight man, straight woman of the group, but that doesn't mean she doesn't always come off as a stick in the mud. She has her funny moments.
Think we need a password? How about kick its ass?
Plus, I love how distinct their designs are, and they all at least have one design aspect I love. Yuna has the Xanarkand Abe's logo implemented, and the frilly half-drift really makes her design pop. Riku's ribbon sleeves are a cute addition, and the skull on Pain's sword is a sick look. The same can be said for the supporting members of the Gullwings. Buddy doesn't usually have much to say, but when he does, he always seems to have some witty remark to make. And Shinra flip-flopping between acting like this all-knowing genius and using his age as an excuse when someone questions him on something he clearly has no knowledge on is super entertaining. But then there's Brother. he can be enjoyable, especially when his voice can make even the most mundane lines sound like the most exciting thing in the world. But that's the thing. He's not always enjoyable. This is because, for some reason, someone on the team decided to give him this weird, uncomfortable, borderline incestual obsession with Yuna. It really puts a stain on an otherwise fun character. Like, I can't even enjoy the fact that he's learned to speak English, since one of his main motivators is just so we can talk to Yuna more. Like, seriously, whose idea was this? And why the fuck are they working at Crapcom now? Or something? Anyways, where was I? Ah, yes, missions. 10-2 is designed around a mission system. Kinda. That's what the game will tell you, but it's more like a pseudo-mission system, since I couldn't find a list of all missions, nor any option to replay them. And since the world is open to you right off the bat, something has to stop you from showing up somewhere you're not supposed to be, and that's where this UI element comes in. Every area's difficulty is labeled based on a 5-star system. The more stars, the more difficult the area will be at your current level. All that being said though, I really can't blame you for heading straight for any hotspot without thinking, since that's what I did for most of my playthrough, and because of that, I ate shit in the third area of the game. But seriously, why on earth is Zanarkand Ruins the third area you go to? I get that the combat is almost nothing like the previous game, but there are better ways to teach someone instead of just throwing them into the deep end. At least Zanarkand's theme is super cool and manages to still hit that depressing vibe as the original. Speaking of which, combat. First things first, that battle theme is dope. Secondly, 10-2's take on combat is quite a different beast compared to 10. If you watch my review of the first game, you might be a little confused, since I mentioned that that game was the last time a Final Fantasy game used a traditional turn-based system. Well, my explanation is that 10-2 actually brings back the active time battle system from the SNES and PS1 Final Fantasies. And this is probably the most active version of this battle system. Nobody has a set position they return to. Inflicting damage can be used to stall for time, and none of the 3 party members have a set role. And this is thanks to the Dress Sphere system, or rather, this game's take on the job system. By hitting L1, you'll open a menu showing the equipped garment grid, allowing all 3 characters to perform a magical girl transformation and swap jobs on the fly. Each job comes with a unique costume, with 3 variants for each of the 3 party members, and these have some fun references, notably some of Yuna's. Her white mage weapon is her starting weapon from 10, her black mage weapon is her celestial weapon from the same game, and my favorite detail, when swapping to warrior, not only does she use Brotherhood, but she also uses Titus's animations. Thankfully, unlike the game that introduced the job system, when you swap jobs, your stats will be adjusted to fit the job, which is pretty easy to abuse. If you're running low on MP, just swap to a job that has a lower max MP so you can get more value out of ethers. But what's up with the garment grid? Like I mentioned earlier, this thing is how you swap between jobs. At first you'll only have the starting one, which isn't all that fantastic despite what its name will have you believe. But as you progress, you'll obtain more grids that fulfill different purposes. For example, some grids will have plenty of nodes allowing access to a multitude of jobs. Just make sure you don't place essential jobs too far away because you can only move one node at a time. But some grids have special nodes that when passed through, grant enhancements like stat buffs or temporary access to abilities. But it sounds like the system wouldn't work well with the sphere grid. And if you're thinking that, you'd be right, which is why it's been replaced with a more traditional leveling system. On the one hand, it's upsetting that Square just abandoned 10's unique leveling system in favor of a more standard one, but you'd have to make some drastic changes to make that system work in the first place. One thing to know about Dress Spheres is that leveling up doesn't grant you new skills. That is handled in a different manner. By using a specific Dress Sphere in battle, you will gain AP which unlocks new skills for that job. By checking the Abilities tab on the pause menu, you can choose which ability you want to learn, and the more skills you learn, the more will become unlockable. If you end up giving this game a shot, take my advice and have one of the main trio specialize into support. Give them the essential white mage skills, give them the ability to buff the party with the Songstress Dress Sphere, and make sure they have access to a job that can deal damage when the party doesn't need any support. Another reason I called this the most active version of the ATB system is because if you manage to hit multiple times in a short sequence, you'll trigger a chain effect, which multiplies damage the longer the chain goes on. For example, the gunner's trigger happy skill fires off multiple shots on one enemy, which can be followed up by a warrior's standard attack, potentially skyrocketing the damage. That being said, the way this system is handled, it puts casters at a distinct disadvantage, since if multiple party members and enemies queue up anything with a cast time, you'll end up with scenarios where one character ends up immobilized for an extended period of time, waiting for the game to tell them when they can activate their spell, while everyone else gets to fire off countless attacks that don't need a cast time. The only advantage that casting has is that after the spell fires off, that character can act immediately. But even then, it feels like magic isn't nearly as strong as it used to be. When I see an elemental enemy, my go-to reaction shouldn't be to wail on it with physical damage instead of using their elemental weaknesses. Unlike 10, there's no overdrives. Instead, we have special dress spheres. If you activate every node on a garment grid, you'll be given the option to transform into a character's special dress sphere, which causes the other two characters to leave, cranks up all the stats to a ridiculous degree, and most importantly, they look cool. Like, Yuna's has this cool flower motif, Riku pilots a mech, and Pain just goes overboard with swords. The only downside to using this feature is that EXP will only be given to the character using a special dress sphere, unless you cancel the transformation early. So, I didn't really use the mechanic a whole lot. Now, while I'd like to move away from the combat, I have one more teeny tiny little thing I need to mention. Fuck this stupid ass dragon fight in chapter 4! Holy shit, I could not stand this thing! If this thing can hurt Riku, it will absolutely do anything in its power to focus her down, which sucks considering that she's my support! Not helping that is the fact that this game is oddly stingy with save point distribution among the new areas, as in, not every boss is preceded by a save point. So I spent a lot of time retracing my steps before getting another chance to fight this dumbass thing. It got so bad that I resorted to using save states at the same time, and I started preemptively using a Phoenix down on Riku, and every time, my paranoia was proven right! Thanks a lot, you racist fucking dragon! But, hey, at least the boss theme is much better this time. Okay, I've been mentioning the soundtrack a lot. Let's actually talk about that. Holy shit, this soundtrack is crazy good! Nearly every track has this distinct style that makes it memorable. When comparing both game soundtracks, I'd say that while I prefer 10's overall, 10-2's soundtrack is something I'd casually listen to. And I gotta respect the decision to not reuse a single track from 10. It really tells me the team was confident with their work. Like, god damn, where do I even begin? Well, I could compare the airship themes between games. 10's version is a fairly simple track that encourages preparation. Meanwhile, 10-2 sounds like a party is constantly happening. Besaid's new theme, while not as good as the original, is an incredibly cozy track. Really makes it feel like you're coming back to a place from your childhood. Huge props to the victory theme for being completely original. Any encounter with LeBlanc and her elites is always a treat, because that means you get to listen to her amazing battle theme. Thunder Plains gives off huge Spyro vibes, like if we got a follow-up to the PS1 trilogy that was good. And to end this part off, Machine Faction sounds like it came straight out of a mid-2000s Sonic game. If you have to experience any one aspect of 10-2, do yourself a favor and listen to its soundtrack. From one stylish aspect to another, I gotta highlight the UI design. Such a massive upgrade over the original. I do like 10's UI, but if I'm being real, most of that love is just because of nostalgia. But 10-2's is fantastic. So much detail is put into every element. The cursor has this subtle but cool animation, and on the pause menu, a globe is on the corner and highlights your current location. Transitions between menu is smooth as hell, and every selection causes a nice little sparkle effect. Not to mention a few elements have this cool water effect placed onto them, which was such a great design decision that ended up being incorporated into 10's remaster, which is unironically a great change. Huh. Damn, that's twice I said something nice about the remaster in this review. What's wrong with me? One of the best opportunities you can have when making a sequel that takes place years after the original is showcasing how much the world has changed in the time between entries. So, how will this 10-2 explore this idea? Well, geologically speaking, kinda? The obvious location to showcase is Kilika, as we get to see how the town looks without the big mortarfish existing. But when you look at everywhere else, the change has become significantly less drastic. The Thunder Plains lightning rods have been upgraded, meaning you don't have to dodge lightning bolts anymore. Mushroom Rock has headquarters for one of the new political groups. Makalani Woods have been said to be slowly dying after the loss of the faith. And Zanarkand Ruin has become a big tourist attraction, much to the disappointment of Yuna. The only exception to this is that the way to Makalani's temple has been completely removed, and the temple itself has been submerged. But this ultimately means that an area was removed. That being said, the new platforming actions you can perform in the overworld should give these new areas a twist to make traversal more interesting. But these mechanics aren't really utilized as much as you'd think. The only old area that really takes advantage of this is Besaid. Now, I'm not saying that every area needs every single cliff to be climbable a la Breath of the Wild, but surely they could have spots like this chest in Luca, just a small detour to get some extra loot. The new areas do a much better job at using this mechanic, but even then, the most this mechanic amounts to is just holding the circle button while exploring until the game decides to let Yuna jump around. So, what about those new areas? Surely if Square dropped the ball when it came to revamping old areas, they probably went all out with these new areas, right? Well, not really. A majority of new areas can be described as hallways built with X material. It's pretty disappointing how uninspired some of these locales are when the beginning and ending areas are so much more visually interesting. The only one of these hallways I liked was the ones in Bavel. The fog enveloping the pits and the moving blocks really add to the unsettling vibe of the locale. When it comes down to it, the changes to Spear are more so societal rather than geological. People end up traveling far more often. Jose's temple has been repurposed as headquarters for the Machine Faction, a group of Albed experimenting with new Machina creations, and the Guado have been driven out of their home by the Ronso, an unfortunate consequence when the biggest figurehead of the former wiped out a massive portion of the latter. But I do have to question why they're hiding out in a location that is closer to Mount Gagazet. Seems a little counterintuitive. And that's not even mentioning the changes individual characters went through. Trummel now ultimately regrets his decision to blindly serve Seymour, and in a rare instance of this trope, doesn't expect forgiveness in return. Waka is spending his time figuring out how to be a good parent, and Isaru has officially gained the bum status by being one of the main folks that turned Zanarkand into a tourist joint. The fall of Yevon is really felt given how much of a drastic turn these characters go through, and end up being one of my favorite aspects of this game. Hell, depending on your choices throughout the journey, some characters will actually be upset with the Gull Wings, even going so far as battling you. And speaking of the journey, I think it's as good a time as any to talk about the rest of the plot. So after some successful sphere hunting missions, the Gull Wings set their sights on a sphere in Kilika, where the two major political groups are fighting over it. These groups being New Yevon and the Youth League. After successfully stealing from both groups, they find that it contains footage of Artias lookalike, approaching some sort of machina weapon, claiming that it's the only way for him to save this person called Len. Not liking the bad vibes of said contents, Brother demands that they should get rid of it, and entrusts Yuno with this task. At this point you're given a choice. You can either return the sphere's New Yevon's leader, Baralai, or you can donate it to the Youth League's leader, who is someone I can't take seriously because of his name, which is fucking Nuge. The game tries to paint both groups in a negative light, but let's be real. Would you rather support the group that names itself after the old, corrupt government that caused countless deaths, didn't even follow their own rules, kept numerous secrets, and doesn't even show any signs on improving what the old government did wrong? Or would you rather support the group that doesn't do that? So yeah, I end up giving my support to the Youth League. After giving the sphere to Nuge, he explains that the weapon they all saw is Vegnagun, warning the Gull Wings that it is incredibly dangerous, and unfortunately for Yuna, he has nothing to say about the lookalike. This is interrupted when they find out that LeBlanc has snuck to the airship and stole a broken sphere found earlier in the game, so they sneak into her home to get it back, which is actually Seymour's old home. Which I bring up because LeBlanc went through the effort of remodeling the bedroom and digging out a secret passageway, but didn't replace all the photos of the Guado's leaders. Deep within LeBlanc's secret passageway, the broken sphere is found, as well as its other half, which LeBlanc had beforehand, to which she shows up to do battle over the sphere. Afterwards, the Gull Wings reassemble the sphere to view its contents immediately, which contains a more detailed look at Vegnagun. LeBlanc states that it was recorded somewhere deep beneath Bavel. Wow, Bavel hiding secrets? Who would have guessed that? Whoa! LeBlanc then basically forces the Gull Wings to tag along with her to infiltrate Bavel and find the weapon. During the infiltration, they find that Bavel's temples is swarming with fiends. The chamber that housed Bahamut's face has a giant hole where the statue used to be, and down said hole, they find the area where the first sphere of the lookalike was filmed in. Traversing deeper, Vegnagun is nowhere to be found. Instead, we're greeted by something even more shocking. Bahamut, as in the Aeon. Despite Yuna's best efforts, the Aeon doesn't seem to show any signs of showing her any mercy, forcing her to fight this resurrected ally in an emotional battle that I completely ruined by opening the fight by making Yuna and Riku, the two characters most affected by these circumstances, set up buffs on songstress, turning half of this heart-wrenching battle into this. Once Bahamut is taken down, Yuna is left with nothing but her thoughts about the eternal calm, feeling its effects fading away, and yearning for a certain someone. Suddenly, a distress signal comes from the airship. Large groups of fiends are swarming from the temples across Spira, and both Baralai and Nuge have suddenly disappeared. With the dire state of affairs as it is, the Gull Wings decide to put spear hunting on hold for the time being, rebranding themselves as your friendly neighborhood Gull Wings. So, they head out to Besaid, Kilika, and Jose, dealing with the fiends inside and finding the temple's respective Aeon, which end up being the source of the large amount of fiends. All of these temples also have the same hole found in Bavel, in place of the temple's faith. They initially have no plans to explore these holes, but a weakened Ixion catches the group off guard and knocks Yuna into the hole in Jose's temple. The hole leads her deep into the depths of the far plane. When she awakens, she realizes that the songstress stress sphere has equipped itself onto her. In fact, weird things have been happening with the sphere in Yuna. After dealing with LeBlanc in the intro, the sphere causes her to uncontrollably dance, which initially gets written off since the emotions of whoever is recorded on the sphere passing on to the user is a known side effect of the garment grid. But after learning about Len, Yuna gets uncharacteristically upset over not knowing who she is, and while taking a nap with the sphere still equipped, has a strange nightmare where she and Titus attempt to flee from Bevelle guards, only for the both of them to be gunned down, and now, this incident in the Farplane. Down here, Yuna meets the Titus lookalike, but this man is not Titus. This is Shuyin, the main antagonist of the game. Seeing the conflict between New Yevon and the Youth League, and how it's not that much different from the war between Bevelle and Zanarkand, he vows to use Vegnagun to end this conflict. Permanently. While telling Yuna this, Shuyin mistakes her for Len, even after she tells him it's not the case. Given his knowledge of events from 1,000 years ago, it's clear that Shuyin is an unsent, but not in the typical way, as Nuge and the leader of the Machine faction, Gipple, make a sudden appearance, revealing that Shuyin is possessing Barrel-Eye. Once revealed, he makes a hasty retreat, with Nuge and Gipple chasing after him, leaving Yuna alone with more questions and no answers. And here is where one of the requirements for the good ending is located, as during this scene, if you press the X button 4 times, a familiar whistle leads Yuna out of the Farplane. Once Yuna returns to the airship, she explains what happened. When she brings up Len, Shinra just casually mentions the songs for Sphere originally belonged to her 1,000 years ago, but that's all he knows. During all this sudden news, Pain heads to the deck and Yuna follows, handing her some spheres that Nuge and Gipple handed to her before going after Shuyin, requesting her to give them to Pain. And here, we get some long overdue development for her. She originally met Nuge, Barrel-Eye, and Gipple 2 years ago, as candidates for the Crimson Squad. This was created by Yevon as a way to better manage the Crusaders, but many candidates died in an accident, which caused the whole thing to fall apart, and the 4 went their separate ways. But despite being there when it happened, Pain was still left with unanswered questions, thus why she became a Sphere Hunter. With that backstory out of the way, the Gullwings are left wondering what they should do now. Pursuing Shuyin is an option, but not only are Nuge and Gipple already dealing with that, but most of Spira still doesn't know where their leaders are, and tensions between the Youth League and New Yevon are running high, and if something isn't done about it, it could elevate into a full-on war. Yuna decides that the Gullwings should try to ease the tensions between them first, settling on a concert performed by her. But where will this concert take place, you may be asking? Well, there's a few good options. There's Luca with its stadium, but then again, booking on such short notice sounds unlikely as hell. The Comlands is a nice wide open area, but a lot of that space is being taken up by all the minigames there. Hell, despite how out of the way it is, the cliff overlooking Zanarkand could be a strong contender. So, where did they decide to host a concert at? The Thunder Plains? What the hell? I get that the rampant lightning strikes aren't as much of a problem as they used to be, but this is still an insane spot! Are you trying to get half the population killed? Well, either way, with an audience comprising of both New Yevon and Youth League members, Yuna gives a speech about the war between Zanarkand and Bevelle, how it ended with the birth of Sin, and that Spira shouldn't repeat this mistake with its current conflict, finishing her speech by stating that despite disagreeing with each other, everyone's hearts ultimately share the same feeling for Spira to prosper. That is what this song is about. Final Fantasy X-2's other vocal theme, 1,000 Words. During the performance, Shinra's Machina, intended to enhance the show, reacts to the songs for Stresssphere, projecting an image of Len, turning this performance into a duet between the two, and revealing her final moments, those being identical to the nightmare Yuna experienced earlier in the game. Also, this is pretty obvious to point out, but Len is putting in way more effort into her vocals compared to Yuna. After the performance, Machen is here to provide some more information about Len. 1,000 years ago, she was known as an incredibly talented performer, but she was also a powerful summoner, so when war threatened her city, she was forced to abandon her musical talents to defend her home. Although she was content to die for Zanarkand, there was one person who refused to let her die, her partner, Shuyin, who planned to steal Vegnagun and use it to save her. But, as we've already seen, the plan failed, and the two were gunned down by Bevelle's soldiers. With the lover's backstory explored, our heroes theorize about Len's feelings towards Shuyin's actions in her final moments, coming to the realization that the reason that Shuyin is still around to this day, with his plans to wipe out Sphera, was because he died before Len could say her final words. I love you. Now that the conflict between Spira's groups have been subdued, it's time to confront Shuyin by jumping into one of the various holes in the temples. The Goldwings make their way into the far plane abyss, finding the remaining Aeons that haven't shown up yet. Oh yeah, as a quick side note, the Mage's Sisters can go fuck themselves! Not only do most of their attacks have a cast time, meaning that if you're in dire need of a heal, the cast queue will make that nearly impossible, but every time they do any move that isn't a standard attack or spell, the game swaps to wait mode, which is typically reserved for cinematic attacks or swapping dress sphere. So this fight just ends up being a dreadful slog that turns the party into a group of sitting ducks fighting for their lives. Hell, the sisters also can just straight up cheat. You'd think that after they use Delta Attack, a move where they all act on the same turn, they'd all be left open, right? That sounds like a natural thing to happen since the attack sets the entire party's HP to 1. Well, you'd be wrong! The cast bars aren't reset, and they can just get a cheap kill on you. Like, yeah, that sounds like good game design! Anyways, after defeating Anima, Bahamut's faith makes a return, apologizing for falling under Shuyin's influence, and providing some insight on the nature of his existence. His current form is described as a shadow, fueled by his grief and hatred, and Yuna plans to banish this shadow by giving him Len's final words that he never got to hear. Going deeper, we find LeBlanc is also down here because, as it turns out, she and Nuge are in a relationship and she wants to make sure that he's safe. Eventually, Gipple is found, and later Nuge. He has a plan to neutralize both Shuyin and Vegnagun. Since Shuyin needs someone else's body to operate Vegnagun, Nuge plans on shooting Baralai, baiting Shuyin to attempt to possess him, which has been rigged to kill itself and take the shadow down with him. But, before he can execute his plan, Yuna says the best line in the game.
I don't like your plan. It sucks.
Citing that his plan is basically the same thing she did 2 years ago, sacrificing the Aeons in order to defeat Yu Yevon. While that plan ultimately worked, not only did she not have any other choice back then, but when she looks back on that day, she ultimately believes that the people she lost that day shouldn't have been lost in the first place, and is ultimately left with regret. After hearing the voices of her father and his guardians, she vows that she will not fight in battles that require sacrifices to win, and explains her plan on how to stop Shuyin. At the end of the day, Vegnagun is still Machina, meaning it can be taken apart just as easily as it was put together. So Yuna plans to attack the machine at multiple areas at once, with Gipple and Nuge attacking the head, LeBlanc handling the legs, and the Goldwings taking the tail. And once the Machina is decommissioned, Yuna will use Len's sphere to deliver her feelings to Shuyin. In reality though, this just means that the fight against Vegnagun is a multi-phase encounter where you basically just take over for the other two groups as you catch up with them. Just try your best not to die at any point, because if you do, you have to start over. Not from the beginning of the fight, but right before the cutscene where Yuna tells Nuge that his plan sucks complete booty cheeks. And after sitting through this cutscene a second time, I just gave in and abused the fuck out of save states after each phase. Like with Racist Dragon. Luckily enough, phase 1 of the plan works, right before Vegnagun wreaks havoc, and it's time to start phase 2, which works long enough for Shuyin to leave Baralai's body, but before he fades away, he sees through his own delusions and goes berserk, starting the final phase of the final boss. Thankfully, this is the easiest part of the encounter, as Shuyin uses a modified version of Titus' moveset, and since he's primarily a physical fighter, it's easy to slap on Protect and nerf his damage output in a single turn, which you'll need since he spams the shit out of Titus' overdrives, just with alternate names. Spiral Cut is Spin Cut, Slice and Dice is Hit and Run, Energy Rain is Force Rain, and his final overdrive, Blitz Ace, becomes Terror of Xanarkand. Given that last one opens with an 8-hit combo finished off with one big final hit, even Protect doesn't guarantee safety. Eventually, Shuyin is subdued, but refuses to listen to Yuna. Right when it seems like there's no way to stop him, Len's emotions from her sphere react to Shuyin, creating an image of Len, not unlike Shuyin's current form. She manages to soothe his hatred, and the lovers fade away together, not before Len thanks Yuna for all she's done. And with that, Final Fantasy X-2 is finished. But now, that begs the question, which of the 6 possible endings did I achieve first? The answer to that is the bad ending, caused by dying in Vegnagun's final phase and destroying Spira, because it loves silencing the entire party right before Riku attempts to top off the party's health before it activates its super move. Okay, but for real, after defeating Shuyin, what ending did I get? Well, despite my best efforts, triggering the whistle in the far plane isn't the only requirement for the good ending. According to a GameFAQs guide that I checked, you need to talk to Machen in Gual Salam during Chapter 3, but I didn't manage to find him anywhere. This is because the guide failed to specify that he's located in LeBlanc's house, only appearing after you talk with her and her elite multiple times and collect the Gal Sphere. So, I ended with the normal ending, where Gipple, Nuge, and Barreleye hold a public announcement in Luca, basically apologizing for letting things get out of hand and thanking Yuna for showing them the error of their ways, as they resolve to work together to ensure Spira's future stays bright and the eternal calm continues. But Yuna is nowhere to be seen. Though she was offered to be a part of this announcement, she declined, telling them that she's returning home, but not before making quite the exit. And the ending is topped off with Yuna reciting a major quote from 10, but with a more positive twist. So I completely fumbled my shot at one of the good endings, with no way to go back and fulfill the requirements. Am I just fucked? Forced to start over from scratch? Well, not really. As it turns out, 10.2 has a new Game Plus feature, which transfers over your collected dress spheres, learned abilities, and items unrelated to the story. And, since I ended this playthrough with 50% completion, I figured I might as well take the attempt to achieve 100% completion, which, on top of the requirements for the good ending, is needed for the ultimate ending. So tune in next time as I go through the journey to 100% Final Fantasy X-2. May God have mercy on my soul.